All right. Welcome back to the Performance Podcast. This is episode 6 with a longtime friend, Emilio Ortiz. Emilio, how are you doing? Welcome.
I'm doing amazing, brother. It's so good to connect after we were saying 8 years, almost 8, 9 years since we
Yeah.
last sort of connected, but we had social media keeping us up to date with one another's lives, and we've done, incredible things. And I'm just really, really proud and happy to see everything that you've done, and what you've become in that process. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to
Yeah.
reconnect, bro.
Yeah. Absolutely. And likewise too. It's been interesting to watch because I've always wanted to start a podcast.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to start a podcast. And I'm just watching you posting and putting yourself out there. And that's always been like a big insecurity of mine.
Hmm.
And to watch you just start to like really dig your heels in and like build this platform was like super inspiring to watch, and especially like the growth of it. um and this was kind of I guess based off of the information and the things that I've seen. I was so interested to, because everyone has that light bulb moment. You were like, all right, like I am going to do this. What was that light bulb moment for you where you're like, hey, like I'm obsessed with digging into wisdom and growing my mind. I'm going to do it. Like, was there a specific incident that just clicked for you?
Yes. And I feel that life isn't linear at all. So we all go through these ups and downs, and you always see that graph where it's like, oh, life is sort of an up and down, but eventually is always like an uphill, right? And I've gone through a lot of changes in my life. The last time we saw each other was probably in sophomore year of high school, where I was living in California, and then all of a sudden my parents said, hey, we're moving back to Colombia. And that for me was just like, oh my God, how do I deal with this change? My whole dream was, and all I thought about was basketball at that point. That was all I was doing with my time, with my, after school hours, is just play basketball and, get the reps in. And I loved it. And I never really had this curiosity that I do now at that point. It was just, what is my life? Let me, living in Huntington Beach, going to the beach, going to play basketball, being with the friends. And when I got to Colombia, it was just a paradigm shift of, oh wow, there's so much more that I don't know about, culturally, language wise. I had a lot of practice and refining to do with my Spanish and fitting in with like the social cues and everything that was going on over there. And what happened was, when we talk about identity, when we talk about things like changing who we are and, going through such a big experience of that change, I had to literally change my personality. I had to change who I was. It wasn't the Emilio from California, because when I got there, I'm like, that Emilio is not going to get accepted. And that was like the initial moment where I felt that rejection within myself of, I'm not enough, because if I'm the Emilio from California in Colombia, I'm going to get rejected. So I
Mm,
had to change myself completely. I had to sort of restructure who I was. And I guess that would be the initial moment where I sort of separated from myself, my true essence, because the next couple of years after that, it was me trying to fit into a culture that, although it was part of my blood because I am from Colombia, those are, my roots, but at the same time, I was trying to do and fit in constantly. And at that moment, I wasn't consciously aware of it. It was just something that I was doing off of, this happened to me, so let me just adapt. And I
mm,
think a lot of us just get put in situations in our life where we just have to, on the fly, adapt and change. So what happened was, I took on a new identity for myself. So then it became Emilio, the guy that drinks alcohol. I didn't at that point ever had drank really before that. So I go into a culture where my friends or the people surrounding me had been drinking since the age of 13. And I was 16 at that point. So I'm like, oh, now I have to play the catch up game. I have to catch up to these people. They're way more developed than I am at that. So that just became of me trying to put more labels onto myself. So it's not only the Emilio that, drinks, but it's the Emilio that also gains popularity by doing this, by chasing this pretty girl or getting attention from these people. So it was all like an outward approach. And I was trying to seek that validation from the outside and looking around me and saying, okay, how can I make the next 3 years of high school the most enjoyable, um, and not be miserable in this move? Because I was, in a sense, very hurt from the decision that my parents took from leaving. But at the end, now looking back, it was the best thing that ever happened. So just to progress a little bit on the story, I decided to go to Europe for college. I graduated, I was in Colombia. Everyone around me thought I was going to go back to California, back to the US, but it was sort of that chip that changed from seeing a different culture, seeing a different country. And I had been to Colombia before, but it was just actually now living it, and it just opened my worldview. So I'm like, let me go explore another side of the world as well. Let me go to Spain. So I get to Madrid, and Madrid is known for being one of the biggest party cities in the world. And what happened was that identity that I took with me from Colombia just expanded even more. And I became more of a party animal. I became more of like just seeking everything outside. And what happened was, after that, 7, 8 months of that routine, that lifestyle of sleeping 4 hours a day, having to go to classes the next day, being hungover constantly, nourishing myself purely sugar and caffeine. It just became a lifestyle. And I think a lot this resonates with a lot of people that get to college and they have the expectation that this is what college is meant to be about. Just like, let yourself go, you're finally free from your parents, you know. And I had that mentality until the point where my body just said, stop, literally stop. And I got very sick. I had, what now I know as to be chronic fatigue. Just, I was constantly tired. It was very hard for me to get out of bed. And even the mental part, I was foggy. I couldn't think clearly. I would get to class and I couldn't focus for more than 5 minutes at a time. So I knew something was wrong. I wasn't being wired. My body wasn't being wired the right way. So at that point, I finally said, let me seek out help. And I was really lucky because when I was living in California, my mom had this spiritual awakening over there. And she became a yoga teacher. She became a sound healer as well. So I had that in my environment surrounding me, but it wasn't till the point where I knew I needed help that I reached out my hand and said, Mom, teach me how to meditate. Whatever, all those things that you do that, I call you weird for it. I'm ready for it now. And then I came across a quote of a book that said, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So that was sort of like that initial moment where I was like, I need help. And meditation came to me, knowledge came to me, books, podcasts as well, mentors in the form of people online that I was learning from. It all sort of opened up from there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and it's funny. Like, I've always had this one situation of like a time that we were. Do you remember the Blue Park?
Of
Yeah,
course,
so
I
this is
remember the
like,
Blue Park, bro.
yeah, so there's a park for you know, almost 99% of people listening to this is there was a park by our houses that we went to. And my whole like picture of you, and actually you and your mom, was built off of this one situation that we had years ago. I think it was in middle school, and we were all like, I think it was just a bunch of us guys. We were like playing around, like I think we were wrestling, and someone
Uh-huh.
tried to punch me in the face because I don't know what I did, or someone got mad, and
Yeah.
I hit him back.
Huh.
And so he started crying, and your mom actually coincidentally walked up, and she, instead of what I thought I was going to get screamed at, because like the fight stopped once I hit him back, it was done.
Mm.
And your mom actually walked up and asked what happened, who started it, and like she tried to mitigate in like a healthy way, which I've never seen before. What ended up happening was the kid cried and ran away, but like for once I was like, it blew my mind to be connected to someone. I didn't know your mom at that point. I think I've met her a few times, but I didn't like really know her. But for her to show
Mm.
me like kindness even when I did something poorly, kind of just like snapped something in my mind. I was like, wow, that was a beautiful situation. I've never ever forgotten that situation. Anytime I think of Emilio,
Wow.
that situation and your mom, always
Mm.
connect for me. And it's funny that you said that your mom is that starting factor for you, because that situation in my mind makes sense. Like there's something there that I feel like most parents would either scorn, scream at, you're both wrong, which I agree we were both in the wrong, clearly. I mean, there's no real violence should never be the option,
Mm.
but to actually give love on both sides is not necessarily seen consistently. And it was just a very like eye-opening kind of situation. Would you say your mom would be your not stepping stone, but your first mentor within this space?
Within the spiritual space, yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Because she opened a can of worms in the sense of all of the teachers that I've learned from now sort of came transmission through her.
Mm,
So she had all the books at home. And it was at that point where I was, in college and I went back home for the summer. And I went into, because we had like a guest room that she sort of made her yoga studio room, typical things that moms do when their kids move away. Uh, so she had that and like a whole library. And I walked in the moment I came back after that first year. And I just started looking through the books and I just started like, diving into them and just became obsessed with learning. Now, on the other side of the spiritual part, more so the discipline, the life advice, all of that also stems from my dad as well. So my dad's on the other end of my mom, where my mom's maybe more in the ether and my dad's more on the ground 3D physical dimension.
mm,
And it's been a great combination to sort of have both of those exposures and mentors for where I am right now, because I can integrate both the spiritual side, and that's become a big part of my life. I mean, that's what I do with the podcast, is have these sorts of conversations that elevate consciousness. But at the same time, how do we make all this practical? How do we make some, concept like meditation practical for someone that needs it? So
mm.
those are all the things that, I guess it wasn't planned. In a way, what I'm doing right now, in a way, I had a lot of free will into it, but I got catapulted into it. And I also had these influences from people in my very close proximity that I could learn from as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I do want to touch upon this topic because I see it in so many places, and it's again, I feel like we connect really well within this space because I had to go through it myself in a completely different way. But I do want to hear like your process of, because it is counterculture, right? You were following the norm. You're going out, you're partying a lot. It didn't sound like nutrition was uh, that high on your priority list, and so what did that look like when you started to change and go, because I would call that going against the grain, right? You were going against what the normal amount of people were doing at our age, which was partying, going out, kind of doing whatever. What did that look like? Did you lose friends, or what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, I'll start with sort of time, because a lot of these things have to do with how we manage the hours that we get in the day. And I
Mm.
was really lucky because I chose a degree, I was the typical degree where no one knows what they want to do with their life. So they just choose business administration.
Yeah.
That was what I did. And the university I ended up in, it, just to say very clearly, it wasn't as demanding as maybe some of the other universities. So I had a lot of time, let's say, in my day. But for example, the first year, I was channeling that time into partying and sleeping, partying and just doing things that weren't directly contributing to any growth or
Mm.
any momentum of where I wanted to go, because I didn't know where I wanted to go. So I think the first step for me was exposing myself to teachers and mentors. And I read so much and I listened to so many podcasts. I can't even count how many hours I've listened to information, and probably 80% of it has come in one year and come out the other. But there's those nuggets of wisdom that still stick with you down the line. And what really occurred was that when I had this inclination of I need to do something with this knowledge, I need to share it with people. There was a lot of fear that came up, a lot of discomfort. And it wasn't just like, let me start a podcast and then the next week I was already recording episodes. I think it took me a little bit of time to step into that new identity. And here's the beauty of these transition moments, because you're stepping out of an old reality and stepping into a new one. Dr. Joe Dispenza calls that the river of change. So people have to recognize when they're in that river of change and be very patient with themselves and not try to jump from the old to the new in an instant. And I had to take a lot of smaller steps to actually come up with the courage to go against the grain, as you said, because also living in California, people are just open to so many opinions, to so many perspectives. It's a very, free speech. Anyone can have their way of thought and their way of doing things, and no one's necessarily directly judged for it. That's sort of what I felt, having the contrast going into Colombia, where our high school, there was probably over 3,000, 4,000 people at this point. I don't even know how big that school was, but
Yeah.
I went into a high school where my graduating class, there was 110 of us.
Mm.
And these people had been with each other since kindergarten. So the culture over there, it's all about, I don't want to say all about, but a big pillar in it is gossip. What is the other person doing? What did they wear that day to the party? Who did they hook up with? And they sort of start forming a persona around you that a lot of the times isn't even you. It's just things that people have said and people have projected onto you, and you've bought the opinion. So then that becomes your new identity. So what I had to do shifting out of that, because if I would have just stayed in California, maybe I would have been in less of a fear of what people thought. But I did let myself get influenced with that sort of cultural upbringing that I had later on in high school. And it really took me just deciding to, as you said, go against the grain, but at the same time, just be very aware that a lot of the times people will talk, people will say things, but it doesn't necessarily define you. And it was so interesting because I thought that when I started the podcast, people were gonna judge me for it. But I think I was so passionate about it and I had such an open heart towards it that all I received, well, from what I know of and from what people, the people that I drew in, was complete support and complete love for what I was doing. And that's the interesting part. A lot of the times we think that there will be an outcome if we choose to do something that is in alignment with our soul's mission and with our soul's purpose. When that happens, it's usually less of a more blocks come in the way and more of a it becomes more of a clear path. And you just have to make that commitment with yourself of, am I going to continue committing and aligning to that mission, to that purpose, or listen to the outside and go back and draw back into the old self?
Yeah, that's beautiful. It is funny to recognize that usually the biggest critic and the one that pushes you back the most is yourself, because you
100%.
have that mind that's constantly running like, well, I'm gonna be judged, or they're gonna hate this, or it's like the people that are probably far and few, but the ones that do hate it, they'll probably just unfollow you and run away from the event itself. So it's like you just got to get past that negative self to really just open up and to like lead yourself into that path that you were kind of made to do. It is kind of interesting though, because I look at it from my journey of when I went kind of counterculture, because I was just so fed up with, like, you're always trying to catch up. So if I drank Saturday, Monday was a little bit harder than it should be. And so then I'm catching up and starting my week by Tuesday. And it's like Tuesday to Friday, like that's good and all, but that's not that much time. And my competitors are already getting ahead of me. And so at some point, and I usually look at myself in the aspect of, I'm not that talented. I work hard. I work really hard.
Yeah.
And so if you're not that talented, you have to kind of grasp at anything percentage wise, even if it's 1, 2%, 0.5%, anything that can kind of elevate me, like I'm going to reach at. And like the lowest hanging fruit was so obvious. I was like, well, my Saturday is absolutely destroyed. I'm trying to recover Sunday. And then Monday, I go into practice kind of dying. It's like, I don't even like going out that much anyways. And it was kind of like that whole culture, right, is just so like me. Like it's, let me take photos of me doing these things that really don't make me feel that good. And then I'm benefiting no one, or the inverse is you're hurting other people. And it was just always this like never ending cycle of negativity. And so when I stepped away from that, though, the voices did elevate and you heard it. Well, he's kind of being weird, or he's kind of, doing his own thing. And I don't know why he's being kind of a loner, but it's like, it's going to be hard at the beginning to step away and to like actually separate yourself for a bit. I'm assuming with kind of a smaller group that you had, like that must have been like absolutely apparent for you, like the
Yeah.
voices, the negative voices. And like my little circle too was fairly small, but there was the ones that understood and got it, and then there was the ones that didn't. And so it's just kind of like honing in first on your own, and it might be lonely, but then once you really get on that journey, again, I'm assuming you fell into this, those people that like to do that same thing end up coming into your life. The ones that don't really like to party, the ones that are trying to, be better in life as a person, business leader, whatever you're looking for, like they actually end up finding their way in. Did you find that to
Mm.
be kind of similar within your journey?
Yeah, that's the law of the universe. That is the law of vibration.
Mm-hmm.
So we know now with the new science that everything is made up of energy. And when you look at something like quantum physics, when you get down to the most subatomic particle, in the end, it's just energy. It's waves. It's a waveform that's just vibrating at such a high rate that it appears to us as it's matter, form, physical, that we can, something that we can touch, something that we can see. But in the end, if you put a microscope, highly advanced microscope, you'll just see that there's absolute 99% space. And what happens is with that law of vibration, there's also another law called as above, so below.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're looking at the most micro thing, but the same thing is happening on an outside macro perspective. So take our, humanity, take, our individual lives. Whenever there is a shift in frequency, the outside reality has to match that shift in frequency. And it becomes so apparent when you're going through big changes in your life, because something like a move or something like a new decision, a career decision, is such a huge shift in frequency, because it requires that big intention. It requires that moment where you say, I'm no longer going to continue my life going out constantly. I'm going to fucking go and become an Olympic athlete. That's a huge fucking intention, bro. Like, I want to honor you for that. That's a huge, just like decision to make that's a big shift. And I can imagine you went from this reality. It's almost like, I like to think of it as shifting dimensions. Whenever I come out of a meditation, I say to myself, I am in a new reality. I am in a new dimension where I am much more clear. I am much more in tune and flow with the nature of the universe, because the universe, in essence, is abundant. And I was also driven a lot by competition. And we've been ingrained that life is competitive, Darwin's theories. But when you actually look at nature, it's way more interconnected, and these species actually need each other in order to survive. Yes, of course, there is survival of the fittest, but when you look at the macro, it's just, I think Darwin had a very, I'm not here out saying I can think better than Darwin, but I'm saying in terms of that theory, which has been debunked many times, is he was looking at it from a very narrow point of view. But when you look at it from more of a macro, you see, oh, this is the labyrinth of life. There is this circle, this interconnectedness. And with that is the energy exchanges that go on. So when we shift so much in our frequency, let's say we're operating, and frequency, like, let's just break it down for people, because It's a very, I used to hear vibration, frequency, energy. I'm like, I can't comprehend that. But the way I see it now is emotion, it actually can be measured.
Hmm.
So an emotion like, gratitude, that's a high frequency. They can measure that. Emotion like guilt is a lower frequency. So wherever we're operating on that scale, and this might be a little far off for people, but I was interviewing a channeler yesterday, and channeler, basically she was channeling some higher dimensional beings that were coming through her. Literally her eyes closed, they roll back, and she starts speaking in another accent. It's crazy to watch, and it's beautiful as well, the knowledge that's coming through. But they said that Earth is the planet of emotion, and we are in a third dimensional reality. So there are, she said, up to 12 dimensions, and the higher we go up in dimensions, it's just there's less polarity and less separation. So in the third dimension, this is like the pinnacle of polarity. So there's white, there's black, and in between that, there's 2 million shades of gray. Let's say for a being that lives on a higher dimension, like a seventh, ninth dimension, it's white and black and 2 shades of gray. So really, we chose to come down here into this reality because we needed to learn from these frequencies and emotions. We're here to feel everything. This is sort of the school where we come, and it's just like opening the lid open and saying, I'm ready to feel every fucking frequency there exists on the universe. But we can choose. That's why we have free will. Like, we can choose to stay on a frequency of gratitude, which I've found to be one of the most powerful, because as I'm going to quote Joe Dispenza, gratitude is the ultimate state of receivership. Every time you're grateful for something, you are inherently telling your body and your energy field, I'm receiving something. So whatever you do more of, you draw in actually more. So you're grateful for more, you draw in more. But let's say you're in guilt all the time and you're guilty about things, and that'll just draw even more things. So someone else that's resonating in that guilt will magnetize towards you, and now you're bonded emotionally to that person. And the same thing happens when we're shifting in frequency. Let's say, like right now, we could say that we're bonding in our curiosity to expand and to learn. And that's why we sort of, in the midst of all the moves and 8 years and, have gone by, like our frequencies have found a way to magnetize again. So that's what's special about it. Whenever we shift in frequency, we change the reality completely.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I keep hearing that quote, as above, so below. And I keep hearing it maybe in different contexts. And I don't know if you can kind of expand on that a little bit more, because I do hear it in just a kind of a spiritual sense, now a vibrational sense, even like a religious sense. And it's just, I feel like it's such a interesting and beautiful quote. And it does make a lot of sense to me. And when I think about it, or I try to like conceptualize it within a religious term, it's just super interesting to think about it like, we're shooting for this thing after, but you also want to make, life here heavenly too. And so like you could just be shooting and reaching for, this afterlife, but you also have to recognize like the place you have here, like the goal is to make this heaven. Like in my mind, that's how I can conceptualize it. Can you kind of like build upon that quote a little bit more?
Yeah, and that's what's beautiful about perspectives, because I had never seen it that way, and I resonate a lot with what you just said. The way that I've experienced that of as above, so below, it actually comes from the 7 Hermetic Principles. So these are very metaphysical texts that people can actually buy the book. And the scribe that came through with that wisdom, his name is Hermes Trismegistus. So he came through and he gave humanity sort of, here are the laws that govern the universe. And when you start reading them, it's like, what the actual fuck? Like, this actually makes a lot of sense, because you look at things like I mentioned, the law of vibration, that's in there. The law of resonance is in there. The law of polarity is in there. So the law of polarity is based on the sense of there's always an opposite. With the yin and yang, there's always a white to the black. There's always the feminine to the masculine. So we are in a universe that in this third dimension, it's basically they call this the realm of relativity and of duality. So there's always duality, but in reality, it's just an illusion, because in the higher realms, there is no separation. There is no polarity, but we're here to learn from the polarity. So how could you know love if you didn't experience fear? And that happens with so many things. How could you experience your masculine energy if you've never experienced the relative to that, which is the feminine energy? That's why we get attracted to people, like in terms of romantic partnerships, we're attracted to the opposite energy that matches ours. That's not to say opposites attract, but it's sort of what the energies match. And with the law of as above, so below, as within, so without, the way I've seen it is your internal reality is a reflection of your outside world. So I experienced this very viscerally when I made that decision to start the podcast, to start interviewing beautiful minds around the world. A lot of people in my outside environment naturally went away or shifted or moved out. And it happened so naturally, so organically, that I didn't really question it, because I knew that I was sort of entering into something more internally that was creating these effects outside of me. And with as above, so below, you look at things from a micro aspect. So now that we're, getting to know more of the things on like a particle level, you expand that and you start seeing the same patterns occur in, let's say, like a planetary system. Or you look at things like sacred geometry. So you look at the way that nature forms certain patterns, and then you see on an even more macro perspective, the same pattern is being formed, the same mathematical equation is being formed, like the spiral, things like that. You start saying what is this dimension that we're living in? What actually is this? And a lot of people that I've interviewed had said, this is a game. Like, you're here, like this reality was created in order for you to play, expand, and grow. So there is really no mistakes in this life. It's just learnings. And when I, briefly touching on religion in a sense, I was brought up not with a particular religion, like you need to practice this. It was very like free, and like my parents defined themselves as Catholic, but it wasn't ever like practice this. Go to church every Sunday. It wasn't really put it into practice. And I had a relationship with God that was always like weird in a sense, because I never knew what it was. Is it a guy up in the clouds? It's like looking at all of us and sort of dictating, things that come into our life. And the biggest thing that I took from religion that affected my belief system from an early age was, if we do something, we get punished. And it was a weird feeling, because it sort of put me into a reality where whatever I would do, I knew I was sinning and I knew I was going to be punished for it. And I've also talked to people that have had near-death experiences. So you briefly touched on the afterlife. They go there and they say that whatever you see on the other side is clouded by your belief systems and perceptions from this lifetime. So if you believe in Buddha, who will you be received by? Buddha, not Jesus. But if you believe in Jesus, who will you be received by on the other side? The frequency, the energy of Jesus. So a lot of it, we're in control of it, but at the sense, I realize that when you talk about things like the divine, like the universe, like God, there isn't an energy of punishment. It's literally like, here's this, oh, I took this path. That's just information for my soul. Oh, now I know what it is to experience hatred. Now I know what it is to experience rejection. Now I know what it is to experience uh, even the most horrible things to the most uplifting, beautiful, inspiring things. Like, it's a database that we're creating. We're just absorbing these experiences that then we can use for our soul's progression. And the law, as above, so below, is just one of those laws that we can operate of. And we know that whatever we do within us is going to be reflected outside of us. If we want to observe the dynamics of what's going on a global scale, look at your personal relationships. What are the dynamics that are playing out there? So it really all starts, from within, and we're all collectively agreeing to this reality. So the more a lot of us start shifting internally, we will see a huge shift of consciousness on a global scale and around the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That was actually kind of one of the points that I wanted to touch on with you was how does this, now that you've dove in so far into, seeking wisdom from so many different places, and it feels like there isn't it doesn't feel dogmatic, right? Because you kind of get dogma within a lot of religions, and you, at least based off of everything I've watched and listened to, you feel released. And I get this kind of, it's not like you're floating, but you're free thinking. And I've
Yes.
only seen that within a few people, but do you feel like you get kind of pushback or, like a little bit of resistance when it comes to people that are very religious?
I do, and I feel that, and I always send love and compassion because I know where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Even though I never had that experience in my upbringing, I can understand what it's like to hold a grip on a belief system. And when I talk about belief systems, what I learned is that, this is coming from the teachings of Dr. Bruce Lipton. He wrote a book called Biology of Belief, and how literally our beliefs can shape our environment, and they can even shape our physical health. And he even started a whole new field of science called epigenetics, where it's not the genes that determine your outcome, your genetic destiny, but it's the environment that you surround yourself in. And what I learned about beliefs is that our mind has only one job. Like, we created this ego mind where its only job is to align our beliefs with our reality. Imagine if you believed, like, in your heart that the sky was red, and you look up to the sky, and every day it's blue. Like, you would literally go crazy. So what I learned about beliefs is I will take on those beliefs that serve me and that help me expand. And even, I know you bring a lot of athletes onto your show. There was a guy, I'm blanking on his name, but he did a documentary with these YouTubers, Yes Theory, and it was called Project Iceman, where he did a triathlon in Antarctica.
Is this
So
Wim Hof?
it's not Wim Hof.
Okay.
They also did a documentary with Wim. His last name is Hoffman, though. I
Oh,
remember
interesting.
that.
Okay.
But he did that documentary, and he did all of that. It's the 5.2 kilometers swimming in the freezing cold ice, then the 42-kilometer bike, and then whatever it is. I'm not sure the numbers, but the whole message from that documentary that I got is limitations are perceptions. So everything that we think that is limiting us, it's just a perception that we haven't broke through. And just before jumping on here with you, another theory came to mind, which was coined by a guy called Rupert Sheldrake. He's a biologist, and he calls this the morphogenic resonance. So basically, species form around this field, and it's influenced by their beliefs, by their thoughts, by their collective perception. So the best example that I can think of is in the 1950s, the scientific community thought and believed that the 4-minute mile was absolutely impossible. So if you ran a 4-minute mile, your lungs would collapse, you would die on the spot, and you couldn't do it. Then this guy, Roger Bannister, comes along, and he's like, I'm going to beat that record. And no one thought it was possible. I think he ran it in like 3:58, something like, right under the 4-minute. and he didn't die. So what happened was that opened up a new belief system, that opened up a new perception for everyone watching. And now people in high school, people even younger than us, 16, 17 years old, are running 4-minute miles. And that just goes to show that once humanity breaks through a perceived limitation, it then becomes available in the collective field, the energetic field, the quantum field, for others to tune into that potential. So when it comes to beliefs, I'm like, I'm going to just grasp onto the ones that I know are going to serve me the most. Like if I believe that I can get this guest on the podcast, I will just look around for confirmation of other people who have done it, because that means that there's a possibility for me to do it. I'm not separate from them, because we're all sort of we're all given the same, in many ways, not the same starting point, but the same body, heart, and soul. And with that, you can do so fucking much. We were just talking about how powerful the mind is when you're in the Olympics. Like that's something that not a lot of people know how to tap into. But when they can sort of understand that their beliefs are creating their reality, they can start letting go. And it's not an easy process. Like, how am I going to let go of a belief that I've grasped onto for 35 years? Like, that's hard for people. That I understand that. And I think that's, with the new generations, our brain is still so malleable that we can pick up new learnings and teachings very easily. So we're very programmable. Like up to the age of 7, you're in a brainwave state called theta, which is the same brainwave state that a hypnotist will bring you in under when he wants to program a new thing into your being. When he tells you act like a dog, it's because he has you in theta. He's programming you. Like we're so programmable. This is literally like the Matrix. When he's like, I want to learn Kung Fu, and he just downloads it, because that's a reflection of what we can do when we pick the right belief systems.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because you look at like performance, right? And you have performance when it comes to sleep, you have performance when it comes to nutrition, you have performance when it comes to all these different factors. And we were talking about, what happened to me in Tokyo and how my mind just crumbled. I was just so destroyed. And, with the people I've been talking to and the path that I've been, going down, like I have recognized that, majority athletics ends up being 100% mental. And like maybe at the start it's not, right? Because there has to be some form of mechanical learning for your body. But once you get to such an extreme level, it just shuts off, because the goal is to just become almost robotic. Like just let the body flow. If you can contain and work with the mind, the body will flow with it. And it's just kind of interesting that like everything you do, to an extent, you could look at it in a performance sense of becoming more spiritual, more awakened, and like opening your mind. How do you think a majority of athletes or all athletes could actually benefit from not just learning about mental performance and things to do, but actually flipping that and looking in first before you go externally to, let's say, a professional that's a psychologist or whatever? How can they learn from inward first?
Yeah. I feel like our biggest teacher is us. Like mentioning the body, the body has an intelligence beyond what we know. And it's even some of those days where you wake up and you're not, your body is telling you, do a different sort of exercise. Let's say I've been doing a CrossFit workout for 5 days in a row. And then I wake up on the 6th day and my body's literally telling me, don't go, don't go, don't go. And then we go and then we get overtrained. It's because we're not listening to the whispers that our body is telling us. And the body does not communicate in language. Right? It doesn't understand English. It just understands symbols. It understands energy. So when there is a disease in the body, or when there's like an illness or an injury, It's the body notifying us of something. I know when I'm stressed out because, you know, I'll get this like, thing in my lip where it just like opens and I'm like, oof, I need to check in. I need to go back to my meditation practice because my body is in oversympathetic state and I'm not giving it enough time to be in parasympathetic and rest and digest. So if an athlete can learn to recognize that before they have someone like a professional tell them like, yo, just take a rest day. I mean, I'm not sure how that works in terms of the dynamics, but internally, I think they already know. And the best athletes in the world are so in tune with their body and their mind. There's like this working in alignment as well. Like when you look at someone like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, they just become beasts on the court because they're tapping into something. They're tapping into an energy that is almost like channeled through them. And channeling can be sort of seen as a very woo-woo, like metaphysical topic, but channeling essentially is taking something that's in energy form and bringing it down to earth, bringing it down into your body. So if there is an energy of greatness, then you can channel that down. And that's what these athletes are doing. They're taking the greatness, the potentials of greatness that are already available to them in the field, and they're just bringing it down to their reality. Obviously, there's years and years of training to do that. We've heard of the 10,000 hours, Malcolm Gladwell. But in a sense, if the more they're aligning the heart and the mind, and really the heart is the seat of intelligence. Like there's new data, there's new evidence that we actually have neurons in the heart. If you look into it, that's telling us that the heart is actually thinking and it's actually there available to us. Just a lot of us have closed down and shut down our heart because of maybe experiences like trauma or breakups that we've had in the past. But when you come at it with an open heart and you start learning to listen to the whispers, that sort of these subtle whispers, because a lot of the times your body will be like yell at you, and it's because it's been telling you like little nuggets. It'll tell you these whispers very subtly. If you don't listen, it'll get stronger and stronger and stronger. That's why a lot of people manifest chronic illnesses in their life, because they've been so disconnected from the body that in a sense they're not hearing it until the body has to scream at them like, look at me, I'm talking to you, I need this. And I don't think there should be this separation of the mind and the body. There has to be an integration. I don't know how that can apply to sports. I can have a sense of maybe even athletes will start tapping into new, like, if you see what basketball or baseball or football was like 15 years ago, I'm looking at NBA games now, I'm going like this has evolved so much. And what, like, we don't even know what is the potential, how far we can go with that when we're just continuously breaking limits, breaking perceptions, breaking belief systems. And that's what I think the greatest athletes and innovators of the world are doing.
Yeah. I think it's just how my mind works. Just based off of you talking, it's starting to run and like produce. And it just like, for me, usually, like this is a saying I've been like living with as of recently, but like logic's found in the middle, right? Like we have Western medicine that's incredible and it can do so many beautiful things. But what has been pushed away was the Eastern medicine that's just as beautiful and it's more in tuned to the body. And what we're finding and what I found within my journey of trying to, fix a lot of my problems within my body, which I don't think I was necessarily listening to. It's just funny to see that, like, I walk it back, right? We used to use this RICE protocol: rest, ice, compress, elevate, right? But we've recognized that doesn't help the recovery. What helps is movement and actually getting blood flow in. And so, in my mind, it shifted back over to listening
Yeah.
to the body. And so just based off of everything you're kind of saying, it's like I love that. Like I agree. Like it's
Yeah.
kind of beautiful. Like these things all can be intertwined. And you probably agree with basketball, like sport, you don't even have to define it as sport, but movement is it can be a spiritual journey to learn about yourself.
Yeah.
And we
Have you
have,
heard of the Camino de Santiago?
I've never heard of that.
It's a pilgrimage that runs all the way from Portugal up to France through Spain. And this is a pilgrimage that there's a Saint Santiago he went on, and a lot of people have it's almost like a 30-day, 40-day walking journey.
Wow.
And people take that, and I've heard stories of people that have gone on the Santiago, and they just have liberations of energy because they're tapping into that source consciousness that we're all connected to. Because for one, you're in nature, and nature is the most intelligent field in the universe. Two, they are moving their body, and in like when you do something like walking, it puts you into a different state, puts you into like an alpha state in the brain, and you become more creative. You start having different thought patterns. That's also the same state that meditation puts you in. So you could say walking is like a meditation. And I love what you're saying about that. And there's just to add on to the open mind part, right as you were speaking, the quote came in that it was the mind is really like a parachute, and it can only truly work when it's open. So that going from let me explore Eastern medicine, let me explore different ways of connecting with my body, that requires you to be open and not sort of fixated on this is the solution and this is what will get me fixed. Like what else is out there? What don't we know as well?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've recognized that with so many kind of random injuries that I've run into is, again, it's I talked about this in a recent podcast, is a lot of people learn within a nice little box, this tiny little box. And if you try to break that open and go outside of it, there's usually two big reactions. One is freak out and project, no, you're wrong because I don't know that. Or it's the other side of them just accepting the unknown and kind of diving into it with you. And so I was talking about that with my whole barefoot shoe experience and how I ran into that. But it's just funny to equate that with like injuries that I've had. And so I like sprained my
Mm,
wrist, let's say a year ago. And I was given this direct path of do this stent, put your hand in a stent and make sure it doesn't move. You need to ice it 2-3 times a day. You need to take a leave and make sure the inflammation's super low. And I literally just told him, I was like, I thank you, but no to all of that, because
mm-hmm.
it's I've tried it, I've done it before, and it didn't work. And then two, it's like I finally understand what works for me is no, I need to kind of flow with my body. I need more blood flow. I need to move. And again, I was trying to ease my way into somewhere that made sense. Of course, I'm not going to push my wrist and go, yeah, I'm going to start doing handstands on it. But let me
Yeah.
come back down to the middle and find where my body needs to be. And it's so interesting, the walking and being on these right vibrational patterns is I am starting to see that with everything that you're saying, is it does make sense. First, listen. Don't just take a blanket blueprint. That's what Western medicine is, and it doesn't work for a majority of the people within this country. Like it's clearly not working. And so
Yeah.
how can we, again, I talked about this in the barefoot podcast, is how can we take 2 steps back to take one logical step forward? Because all we're doing is running backwards at this point, and it's like
Yeah.
sprinting. And that was kind of one of the questions that I had for you, just to kind of jump back to you, is we've seen not just our health. I think we're looking at over 60% of our country, the US, being obese. And then our suicide rates have actually exploded. They're super high. and you're diving into all this knowledge and, being free, finding joy, finding love everywhere. What is maybe a vibrational pattern, or maybe something that people can do to not just find joy within themselves, but to externally shoot that outward? Because I feel like, again, it's like you said, it's, your vibrations attract and repel to an extent, right? So how can we kind of bring that in to not just help ourselves, but the people around us?
Yeah, that kind of took me back to what I was mentioning earlier with the first year of college that was kind of bumpy for me in the beginning. And I didn't mention this, but at the time, I was having this chronic fatigue and I was constantly sick. I wasn't taking care of myself. So what would I do? I had a 24-hour pharmacy down the block, and I'd go there and I'd tell the guy, "Look, this is what I have." He wouldn't even look at my eyes. He would just turn back, go to his cabinets of 1,000 drugs, and he's like, "Here's the one." And I was like, "Wait, I haven't finished telling you what I have, like these symptoms." And I'm not going to trash on the pharmacies and that industry at all. All I wanted to say is that was my own choice of putting my power outside of me. And my power to heal is now going to a guy in a white coat, where I'm saying, "Fix me," because I don't have the power to do that. And that goes a lot to show for people that are in states of disempowerment or have found themselves in a lifestyle that isn't truly what we're meant to experience here. Like, if you look at the body, Da Vinci knew this better than everyone. It's perfect symmetry, it's perfection, it's divine intelligence working and pulsating through us. So when we don't know that, when we've forgotten so much, we put the power out here. And it's like, okay, so if I'm feeling this way, then, opening this can of ice cream and going to fast food and all that, stuffing that in order to not feel that, is going to save me, because that's the solution. It's going to satiate me. It's going to make me release all this dopamine from the neurochemistry, and I'm going to feel amazing because the solution was out here. But with time, you start building on that. You start, these things start shaping even your body. Our bodies are so malleable. Like, we think that in order to, look good, it has to be, a lot of struggle. But really, it's knowing what does your body want? Going back to the ancestral way of living. Are you getting sunlight? That was a huge, I'm like, I would wake up and it's blue light, blue light, blue light everywhere. And I'd go straight into computer. Then I go to the university where it's more blue light, artificial light. And I wouldn't have my skin touch the sun until like 4 p.m., where it's not even at its, best moment for you to absorb all its nutrients. So there is things outside that are natural that, I just mentioned the sun. We mentioned like walking barefoot, fucking grounding for the electromagnetism in your body, that in the, releasing toxins, free radicals, so big, so huge. But it all comes down to that one principle of, am I putting my power outside, or am I taking responsibility for the life I've created? And a lot of the people that are in a certain reality right now, they say, no, well, these are the circumstances and these are the cards that I was dealt in my life. Maybe I didn't come from a family that was financially abundant. There's nothing I can do. This is the reality I'm in. But how many stories have you heard from people that are mega successful coming from those environments too? Because they didn't let the outside world determine what they were going to do inside. And I guess that's the only thing I can say, because, I'm not a medical doctor in that sense. I don't really understand, or even like a psychologist would, of what really goes on in the mind with someone that has suicidal thought patterns and things like that, or obesity is a different thing. I'm not a nutritionist, but what I can say is what I see is everyone's putting their, not everyone, I'm saying people that are dealing with that are putting the power outside. And that's not where you're going to find the answers. Like there has to be, and I'm wearing this sweater. It's a motto that I have for the podcast. It goes, all paths lead inward.
Mm.
So really, like for people that you might look at and say, oh, they've kind of gone off their path, like they're kind of lost. I'm like, hell yeah, because they need to take that path in order to look back within. Eventually, like it could be when you're 60, it could be when you're 30, it could be when you have your Saturn return, midlife crisis, whatever it is, like that journey that you took is eventually going to lead you back within, not outside.
Yeah. Again, it makes, I take it in so many different ways here. And that's my favorite advice, I think, because it makes the most sense. And my flip to, even statements like that, like, I'm not a nutritionist, a dietitian, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist. Do I have to be to see something at face value? Like we're all human. Again, it's like I can look at just the mechanics of someone moving, and I don't need to have this crazy degree behind me to understand movement pattern. And it's just so interesting to see all of these issues within, let's just say, the world. I mean, obviously I feel like it's popped up and it's easiest to see in the US because I feel like it's probably the most extreme here, because I feel like our culture lives within extremes. But it does make the most sense of like, stop, simplify, look in, go outside, right? Like we're sheltered within our own homes, and then you're utilizing things that aren't of yourself to fix yourself. And it's like, no, take off your shoes, go outside, let the sun hit you. Like those UV rays are phenomenal for you. Like getting fresh air is phenomenal for you. Like getting away from all of that blue light that's just blasted in your face all the time is really good for you. Movement is the medicine. That is the real medicine. And it's so enticing the deeper I've gotten within that journey of trying to get away from all these toxins. And there's just so many things that in face value, when I just look at it, I'm like, I don't need to be a scientist to recognize that if I can't, let's just say, even read these labels, and I've got weird stuff within even my own food, it like something feels wrong. It's a red flag. It's not from the earth. Like I'm eating something fake. And so that advice of just to come in to fix a lot of these problems, let it be obesity. Listen to your body. Like pause for a second, just listen. Like, do you need that? Or can we step back and listen and then move forward in a logical way that can kind of more so heal yourself? I love, and this is why I've loved watching your journey, is because you've been able to interview some people that I am a big fan of. Two specifically, Aaron Alexander, movement. Like his big thing is movement. Movement is medicine. I read his book, listened to his podcasts, even yours, and it's just like, again, it just face value. It just makes sense. The other one is Darren O'Lean. Again,
I love Darren.
It just makes too much sense. And I feel like people like that within our society need to be propped up as much as possible, at least in my mind, because, how they've learned and how they've, again, the simplicity, like just simplify. Like, again, I feel like Aaron Alexander gets in the sun all the time. He's moving and he's walking backwards to feel better, backwards in the sense of getting away from all of these things. Darren's the same way. I'm actually, funny enough, going through his new book that came out because, again, I feel like maybe that was within the energy that I've been kind of like shooting out into the universe. It's everything he's talked about within his book that I'm reading has been the things that I've been doing. I've been trying to get rid of all of these perfumes and these toxins that are consistently just doused into our life. And then, I see that, you've done a podcast with these people, and I'm just like, I need to talk
Let
to
me
this
let me
man.
share with you a funny story
Please.
because when I first started the podcast, it was around the pandemic time, and I was living with my girlfriend at the time. And it's just like you go on Netflix, you're like, all right, what are we gonna watch today? And I see this series, Down to Earth, with Zac Efron. I'm like, Zac Efron? Like, I haven't heard of this guy since High
Yeah.
School Musical. Well, no, he's been in other big movies, but I'm exaggerating. And I started watching it because I was enticed to, like, I was looking through the chapters. I'm like, they went to Costa Rica, all these things. This guy talking about superfoods. Right now I'm drinking cacao, and that's really largely because of Darren. He put me on, the superfood game. And when I saw that series, I had a not only like an intellectual connection with everything that they were saying, but I had a deep emotional connection with Darren and his curiosity and his story and the way he would just play and ask the best questions. So I'm like, I need to talk to this man. And at that point, power of Netflix, he was at around like 30,000 followers before the series. And then within a couple months after the series came out, he was like around 500,000. So it exploded. But I was able to get in my foot in the door like right when he was like taking off.
Yeah.
And I was like, Darren, I have this podcast. I'd love to have you on. And we got in contact. We had a great, like the first podcast that we did. And I just told him, and that's another lesson that I've learned in this journey is when you ask, you receive, or you can never get anything in life if you don't ask for it. And you have to be very clear. So the podcast ended, and I told Darren I would love to work with you and support you on your mission. I'm a college student. I have an internship opportunity coming out. Whatever you need, and any other hands in whatever you're building, consider my hands available. And he's like, I'll keep that in mind. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. A couple months later, his team reaches out and they're like, we have an opening. Darren's podcast exploded. So it became the #1 health and fitness podcast in the US after, the Darren Lean show after Down to Earth came out. And he was going to Australia to record season 2. But this podcast had been growing so much that he started needing some help on it. And he would do this segment called Fatal Conveniences. And the opening that they had was a researcher for Fatal Conveniences. And they had no one else on the team. So it was just me for like 5-6 months. Every single week, I'm diving into a new. So let's define Fatal Conveniences for people. It's basically things in the outside world that are man product, human created, that there are conveniences to our daily life. They speed up time, they're just easier, they're convenient, but at the same time, they're fatal to our health. So you can think of something like sunscreen, microwaves, detergents, like all these things that we use in our daily life that when you go into the research, and I was blown away. Like there's some weeks where I'm like, this is intense. Like I shower with this stuff, I put this under my armpit every single day. And it was a big paradigm shift because it's one of those things where once you know something, it's really hard to go back. That's the power of knowledge. Like you can choose to ignore it. You can choose. It's like they sometimes say that ignorance is bliss. But once you choose to let me seek out this knowledge, and I made that conscious choice, it just opened a new reality. I'm like, I would see, all these people using these products, and I'm like, shit, like, there's these just impactful things. Like for me, it was Bluetooth. And I haven't dove into the book yet. But I know that, he went hard on Bluetooth, in that book and also in his podcast. So you're looking at things like for men, infertility rates, there's a big possibility will skyrocket in the next couple of years because as men, we put our cell phones right next to our ball sack, like we're it's there like how many hours a day, it's just radiating
Yeah.
these frequencies, and our body's not used to that, like it's not calibrated for that energy. 5G, the same thing. Like, I'm not gonna go into any like conspiracy theories at all, but once you open up yourself to knowing the truth, and again, there's no one truth, but what is your truth? Then that's when you start saying, I need to make big changes in my life, little by little, though.
Yeah, it definitely gets, because I've been on this journey probably for around COVID, maybe a little bit past COVID, it started happening for me.
Yeah.
Just like looking into all these little things, and it gets overwhelming, especially if you get all of the information at once. You know, like your tap water sucks. What you're showering with is horrible. Your detergents are bad. Your shampoos, your perfumes that you put on, your deodorant, you're sitting there like even your clothes, you're like, oh my
Baby
God.
clothes, bro. That was a big episode for me. I was like, damn,
Yeah,
bro,
like
our
should I just
babies.
burn down my house? Like do I just need to restart everything? And so it's just
Just live in a hut out in South America, bro. Let's all move to Colombia. Let's go.
Yeah. So it's interesting to, see all these things, and it does kind of, it interweaves itself within every piece of life too, because I'm assuming you could probably tap into that too for, diving into your spiritual life. Like it can be overwhelming. Where do I start? All this information starts coming because you're for once looking, and it's overwhelming, like you're drowning with this information. And I do think an important piece there is to take one little thing at a time. Well, can I take out, you know maybe I can input vinegar shampoo, which sounds kind of gross, or not shampoo, but like detergents, and maybe change out one or two shirts to 100% cotton. Does
Yeah.
it look that way for, going into this spirituality journey? Maybe it's one podcast at a time with some notes. What is that like? Was that the same for you? Did you have to ease your way in, or did you just dive straight into the deep end and go from there?
No, I think I needed to, again, that quote that we started with, when the student is ready, the teacher
Mm.
appears. So now, it's way different than when I started, because I was just sort of dipping my toes into these topics. And now, like, there's conversations on the podcast now where it just blows my perception of reality and the game we're living in right now. And I'm like, wait, multidimensionality, parallel universe, past lives, reincarnation, karma, like all these things where I'm like, damn. But like, it's also because I've consciously expanded my awareness where I can be open to these topics without having to judge anything at a single time. And that's sort of the place where I come in these conversations where, I might even have to put out a statement before the podcast. Like, I'm not necessarily completely in agreement to everything that my guests say, but I hold them in that space because it's their truth.
Mm.
And when someone shares their truth, you want to listen in because they're sharing something that is way beyond any superficial things and any superficial beliefs that we've been sold by the larger society. Like I've only interviewed people that go out and find their own truth, and people that have built even their own mechanisms, methods, systems for a better life, for a more expanded life. And it's holding people in that. And I think the more I've come in with that energy, the universe is like, let me give you more of that. Let me give you more of that. Let me give you more of that. And the universe listens. Like, if you're in a closed energy, you're going to receive closed doors.
Yeah.
And if you're in an open energy, the doors start opening for you.
Yeah. That touches on a topic that I did want to bring up too, was, you are again a younger voice within your space. And I've kind of seen you talk about, we're trying to lead this younger generation in the right direction. And I feel like we're in the most divisive time that we've ever been in. And it's interesting to see you kind of try to create your own voice an environment that is welcoming, which I don't feel like we see that much anymore. How do you feel like you try to cultivate that, and especially try to put that outwards? How is that built out for you, especially with doing a podcast that's growing and fairly large? Like you do have a pretty large voice to, give a platform that people might not have in the first place.
Yeah, and that's also a big responsibility too, because in a sense I also see myself as curating these conversations, because I get to choose like what stories, what perceptions need to be told. But it's not like the traditional news where they have a narrative and they have an agenda and they're like, we're only going to feed you stories that align with that narrative. That's the power of the new journalism, which is, in a sense, podcasting, people that are creating their own radio shows, their YouTube channels. Like, people are creating their own universes where, in my experience, what I've wanted to create is a space where I call these people paradigm shifters, because I know that our generation, we're going to be moving into leadership positions around the world in just a couple of years. We're talking about the next decade. Like, the next decade, we're going to be in our mid 30s. Like, we're going to start being CEO of big companies. We're going to be, being professors at universities. Like, we're going to be also having that influence on a large global scale, and our voice is going to matter. And I'm not saying that our voice doesn't matter right now. Like, it can start to matter if we start owning our own truth and sharing that with the people. And every time I sit down and have a conversation with someone, like, my only intentions are, how can I hold loving space for this person? And how can I open their mind just a little bit more? Sharing things that I've picked up and have worked for me. So the space that I create is like, I want also to, it's sort of, I see it as a bridge, because a lot of the people we've mentioned, Darren O'Lean, Joe Dispenza, like, especially those people, they've been around for such a long time. Like, their teachings have been polished, have been tried and tested for so many years. But especially the younger people maybe haven't had as much exposure, because we're just coming into the game. Like, we just came into the game, not even 25 years ago. So it's, how can we create a bridge for that wisdom, those teachings? And I always say, like, people, take whatever you want. Like, I'm going to open up topics that maybe you've never heard of in your life, but take whatever you want. Like, this is like a buffet. It's not, I'm feeding you, force feeding you, the steak, then the chicken, and I'm not giving people that sort of obligation to take on the information that flows through in the conversations. It's just, I always say, open mind, open heart. And sometimes the open heart is even more powerful than the open mind, because the mind, it does have a lot of preconceived notions, and it works in a very, even for a lot of people, like a skeptical just nature. And the heart, it can pick up truth like this. Like, you hear when someone's sharing a story, or you're having a conversation with a friend, like, your mind might not be able to decipher, like, are they telling the truth? Are they lying to me? Like, what's going on? Because it's trying to process everything from the logic, the intellect. But the heart is like, bro, he's lying to you, bro. And girls, the feminine intuitive nature is way more aligned with that. Like, a girl can pick up, like, you're lying to me. And you're like, shit, she got me. Like, fuck, I have to try a new thing now.
Yeah.
But it's just receiving things from the heart. I found that that's super powerful as well.
Yeah. And so, we talk about the younger generation and us trying to, lead the way in a better way. What would be your advice for someone starting their spiritual journey, or just, learning to look outside of themselves? What would be your like easy tips to just begin?
I would say, reframe what your 20s are meant to be about. Because we started the conversation talking about, yeah, we all have these expectations, these perceptions of, what college is supposed to look like, what our 20s, they're the party years where, we're hooking up with a lot of people, we're going out, we're, being reckless. And yeah, there's, for a lot of people, they choose that, and that's fine. But all I'm offering is the advice of, if you could reframe what you want your 20s to be, because, a tree, it needs a strong foundation. And these years, I feel like, are our foundation for when eventually we become those trees. So if we can build a strong foundation now, we won't jump into the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. Like, what did I just do with my whole life? I just sold away my soul to this corporation that they just let me go because, they had to cut costs, and I'm just another cost for them. So for people building those foundations, like for me, the 20s have now been about, I shifted, I reframed. When I was 21, I was like, no, I don't want this for the rest of my 20s. I want experiences that nourish me. I want to network with incredible people around the world that don't share the perception and the upbringing that I've had. And I want to work on skill sets and self-mastery. So for me, the podcast has been my way. Before, it was basketball, right? I wanted to master the three-pointer, and I want to be the best three-point shooter on the team. But I sort of applied that discipline that I learned from sports and the time I played basketball to let me learn the skill and practice over and over and over again until I say I've reached a level of mastery. And I've seen the evolution even with interviews, or even when I'm speaking. I used to be shit scared to raise my hand in class because I also had a belief system that I was dumb, right? I had the belief that I was stupid, or I didn't process information like everyone else did. And there's way smarter people around me. So why does my opinion matter if I'll just leave it to the guy that always raises his hand because he knows what to say. He knows, he knows the things. So now I've also stepped into more of that. Like, the more I practice speaking, the more I practice learning and integrating this wisdom and knowledge, it becomes more of a path, a pursuit of mastery. And that's what I'm fascinated by, because things start for me with the curiosity. Like, I start becoming curious about something, and then it becomes a passion. And a passion is at the moment where you come across a lot of roadblocks, because with a passion, like, you love it, but you're not necessarily like a professional at it. You're playing around. And I recommend people to read The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, because he talks a lot about, being a professional versus an amateur and the power of resistance, things like that. So I think the next 5 years up until my 30s, they're just going to be to continue that intention of experiences, of networking, skill set, self-mastery, and forming the foundation for what I want the rest of my life to be. Because when we're in our 20s, we already have a picture of what we want our 40s to look like. That's what a lot of people have been sold. Like, when you're 40, this is your life. You have the house, you have the wife, you have the husband, you have the 2 kids, and you have that car that you've always wanted. But when we sort of let go of what we've expected or what people have told us that we should do with our lives, and we focus it on day by day, what's my intention going forward? Like, what do I want to intend in this moment going forward, let's say for the next decade? And as you know, like in sports, everything is a long game. Like, we want those quick wins. That's why a lot of people will take shortcuts. And, I've learned to see my podcast as, it's not something I'm going to do for a year and then drop off. Is like, I'm looking at the thousands, the 1,000 episode. I'm not looking at, episode 20 and then I'll like kind of see if I still want to, like, yeah, that's good to calibrate. Like, do I still want to do this? Because a lot of people, they'll commit themselves to the identity, like, oh, I'm a podcaster, or oh, I'm a ballerina, or oh, I'm this, this and that. And out of fear of what, people have known them around them, they've known them for that particular thing. Even if it's not resonating with them, they'll continue doing it because they don't want that sort of, big paradigm shift for others. Like, oh shit, like he quit. Like he doesn't want to continue this. It's being really in tune with yourself, but also looking at the long game going forward. Our 20s should be whatever you want to make it. Honestly, we have the free will, but don't take on what you've been sold about what they should be about. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I love that. And then just, going over your journey and hearing all these people you've connected with and learned from based off of that. Because again, even within my own life, I feel like every time I've connected with a new mentor and brought them into my circle, I feel like it's like a learning curve is boom, completely cut out. And I just, there's so much knowledge that's just like introduced into my life. Who's been a big mentor for you? And what have you kind of gotten from that? What would be some key takeaways that you've learned from these mentors in your life?
I would say someone that's influenced me a lot right now, and I'm going to name two people. They've both been podcast guests, but also become friends in that process as well. One, I'll say Billy Carson, and also another man called Lee Harris. He's a channeler. And what I've learned from Billy is he has literally built this dream life because he has been, he grew up in Opelika in Florida, which was at the time one of the poorest parts in America. Violence, the worst things that you can imagine. And he just realized the power that he had to create and continuously manifest what he wants. So he bridges like conscious thought and conscious effort. And that's his formula of manifestation. Like manifestation is like, can be seen as like this woo-woo thing, like, oh, it's like the full moon. So we're going to manifest, we're going to write down our intentions, and then it's going to become our reality. But the way that he presented that to me was conscious thought. So what are you continuously thinking throughout the day? That's why meditation is so powerful, because you close your eyes, you're not looking outside to the external reality, you're not being distracted by your senses. And it's just you in there in a black box with the thoughts that you've trained yourself to think. And Joe Dispenza, he says, the nerve cells that fire together, wire together. So the more you think of a thought, it just creates a stronger pattern in your brain. The neurons just like attach more and more. If you see a neuron like attaching itself to another one, like they're like reaching out a hand. It's so cool to see like neurons work in the brain. They're like reaching out a hand and then finally they'll touch. But like the more you exercise that thought, it just becomes more of a pathway. So if we do that consciously, imagine the thoughts that we can create and nourish if it's done on a conscious level. And with the conscious effort, I see it in a sense, you are constantly the steward of your own life based off the actions that you take. But it has to start with the thought. Like if you don't have the thought first, like if I'm not saying I'm going to make a sandwich right now, my body won't get up and do it unless it's like a subconscious program. So the more we've done something in our life, it becomes a repetitive automatic program, it becomes subconscious. Like maybe I'll even go and my body will get up without me thinking and make a sandwich. And I'm like, shit, like I have a sandwich in front of me. Or you can see this when you're driving like down PCH and all of a sudden like you're in your house and you're like, I was just in Riverside. I don't know. I'm making up things now,
Yeah.
But if we can exercise the thoughts that we want in our life, then that'll lead up to the conscious effort. And then we'll see like, oh shit, all the things around me I've created because of the merging of those two things, which you could call manifestation. And the other one is Lee Harris. He has inspired me to realize that we're multidimensional in nature. We're not one dimensional. So here's the person who he's a channeler, again, with the metaphysical. He's a channeler, but also he is a musician. He's a writer. Like he's done so many, he's, business owner, all these different things. He's basically the living proof that we aren't one dimensional beings. We can expand and be multidimensional. That's like in these physical bodies, we're much more than that. That's something I realize is like we are eternal, infinite beings that we can do whatever we want, whatever we put ourselves to do. So we are multidimensional and we manifest our reality. Those are the biggest teachings that have recently shifted the trajectory. Like, oh, like I can explore things. I don't have to just be Emilio the podcaster, or I don't have to just be this, that, whatever labels you've bought, in your life. What else is out there? What else can you do? What else is possible? So yeah, those are, I guess, two mentors that I really appreciate. And, I send a lot of love towards them.
That's beautiful. Well, I feel like I got a master class on this podcast of, looking inward and, seeing the external around me. But I really appreciate jumping on this call with me and, chatting a little bit. And I don't doubt I'll have to pull you back on this podcast to chat again, because I feel like we could go for 8 more hours. But
Yes,
I think we're going to end it here. But I just wanted to say thank you. And I really appreciate your time. It's been a really fun conversation.
I appreciate you, brother. We've both come a long way. It's great to reconnect.
All right. Well, you have a great day, and thanks everyone for listening.